to the polar region, where do we want to go? Well, we want to go back to the Phoenix site and drill into the ice. Phoenix could scrape to the ice, but couldn't get into the ice. So the mission that we're working on next, we're naming Icebreaker. We want to make a drill that will drill into the ice and get a sample into the ice and look for organics and look for evidence of life by doing an immunoassay, lab on a chip, thousands of immunoantibodies. Ultimately, we want to drill really deep on Mars, maybe 1,000 meters in the ancient terrain. At the Phoenix site in the north, we're looking for something that may have happened 5 million years ago. Maybe nothing happened 5 million years ago. We know that stuff happened 4 billion years ago. The best place to find that is in this yellow square. And there, we have to drill deep. So that may be a challenge that's suitable for human explorers, drilling 100 meters or 1,000 meters into the ground. Because drilling is one of those things that requires hands. And that's actually the hardest thing to duplicate in a robot. Not the brains, not the eyes. Those are easy. It's the hands. The most useful thing that humans bring in competition with robots are hands. So don't lose your hands. And that's the end. Maybe we have time for questions.
Now, the microbes you find in the Arctic and Antarctic, did they evolve there? So
they're the same kind of microbes
right,
you find out in the backyard.
They made their way there from wherever they originally developed. So even if Mars at one time had conditions similar to the Arctic, unless it had conditions similar to where the microbes evolved initially on Earth, there wouldn't be any microbes.
Right. So that's a very good point, which is that I've only talked about habitability. I haven't talked about the origin of life. And so you can have a habitable environment, but if life didn't get started, then there's not going to be life there. And that's a very hard question, because we don't even know how it got started on Earth. We don't have a consensus theory for the origin of life on Earth. We haven't been able to reproduce it in the lab, and we haven't observed it anywhere else. So we're kind of theory-rich, data poor in that domain. So we can't even fruitfully speculate about what's required for life to start, because we don't know how it started. We don't even know if it even actually started on Earth versus started somewhere else and came to Earth. So it's really quite hard, which is why whenever we talk about other worlds, we focus on habitability, because then we can actually say something. We know what habitability means. We don't know what's required for the ordinary life. The best we can do is first assume that life started on Earth, look at the theories for how life started at Earth and possible environments which it started on Earth, and then look and see if those similar conditions will be met elsewhere. Very crude argument by analogy, very unsatisfying.
Now, from what you said, Mars went through fairly wide climatic variations over a period of millions of years. That might make it more difficult for life to evolve.
Or more better. Who knows? We don't know. Yeah. Maybe what you need for life to evolve is very big swings in conditions.
Yet, have we had those on Earth, given the damping effect of the moon?
Maybe before the moon was formed, before the moon forming impact. Who knows? That's the point, is we just don't know. And we don't even know if life started on it. Some people have argued now that life started on Mars and then came to Earth on meteorites.
Panspermia? Is that the...
Yeah.
Or anywhere else and came to both of them? Or?
Yeah. So we don't know. We don't know.
So why didn't you sterilize the landers? Because
why don't we sterilize spacecraft on Mars anymore?
Yeah.
We don't, because after Viking, it was realized that nothing from Earth could grow on Mars. So it cost a lot of money to sterilize land. And so the international, those rules are set by international treaty, space treaty, and implemented by the Committee on Space Research. And they recommended that we no longer sterilize landers because nothing could grow on Mars. And they're correct.
But haven't you since proven that it may be possible?
Well, we've proven that maybe 5 million years ago, the site that we landed may have been habitable. That's why the arm was sterilized. But the point is that there's not a coherent theory for, or not a coherent a set of rules for what's called planetary protection. And I think we need to develop such a coherent set of rules. Because, for example, everything we've done on Mars so far is reversible. We haven't done any irreversible contamination, because Mars is such a harsh environment. If we wanted to, we know where every single Earthling that's on Mars is, and we could go pick them up. Remember those pictures of the lander and his heat shield and the parachute. We know where every bit of pieces is, and we can pick it up, in principle. It would be expensive, but it would only be linearly expensive. The way to understand it is think of a story. Imagine you have 2 rabbits. You take them to a continent that starts with A. You let the rabbits go, Australia. You come back 10 years later, and you decide that that was a bad idea. So I'm going to collect all the rabbits. We've actually tried this experiment, and it doesn't work. But now redo the experiment. Take 2 rabbits to a continent that starts with A, but it's Antarctica. You release the rabbits. You come back 10 years later, and you're going to find 2 dead rabbits, not far from where you left them. It's still expensive to go get the dead rabbits, but it's only linearly related to the cost of the contamination, unlike the case in Australia, which is exponential. We're used to thinking of biological contamination as exponential. On Mars today, all of our contamination has been linear. Nothing has been able to spread or grow. Now that will not be the case if we start drilling down into aquifers and start contaminating those. And so I have argued that we should change the basis of our policy from this sort of quasi-clean, quasi-sterile to explicitly biologically reversible. We should make the principle of our exploration that everything we do is biologically reversible. We maintain, but if you think, just a little side here, computers and computer science have generated a lot of useful concepts in our everyday life and in science, but the most useful one is undo. Isn't that great? The whole concept, undo, right? And when you're about, at least on a Mac, when you're about to do something that can't be undone, it warns you. Do you really want to do that? Undo is not an option, right? Wouldn't it be great if you go through life with a little bubble that when you're about to do something that couldn't be undone, it would warn you? I certainly could use that. So far, everything we've done on Mars, we can hit the undo button. We can undo. But what I'm saying is we ought to explicitly make that our policy, not to do anything on Mars that cannot be undone at a cost that's linear related to the cost of doing it. Which means we wouldn't sterilize things that land on the surface, but we would rigorously sterilize anything that went below the surface.
But aren't you one of the people who first invented the idea of terraforming, which
Yeah.
seems to be antithesis of what you just said?
No, this is why I want to be able to undo. If we go to Mars and we find that it has its own life, Martians, frozen in the polar regions, waiting to be warmed up, then I would advocate strongly that we warm it up and make Mars an environment suitable for Martians. But what if you got a couple million Earthlings living in dormant, waiting like a 5th column in spacecraft? You warm it up, the water comes, rolls over those spacecraft, and now you've got those Earthlings growing, and you've done irreversible contamination. So if we were to find Martian life on Mars and make a collective decision to enhance their ability to survive, we would first have to go take the Earthlings off. Right? That's why it's important to keep that option open. Right? We don't need to sterilize the spacecraft, we just need to keep the option open, because the theory being that if we found life on Mars and it really was a second genesis of life, the interest would be large enough that it would motivate the cleanup before we did any climate alteration.
I have a